Amanda here. It's time for our witchy tip for the month of July. And this month we're talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and that is not measuring. So often when I see people making herbal potions or teas or tinctures or oxymels or things like that, they get so caught up in measuring and having all the proportions be exactly precise. And people will even ask me questions like, am I allowed to, or can I do this, or is it okay if I do this? And, I get it, but also I feel like those questions come from this place of, looking to something that is external of us for instruction, validation, authority, things like that. We're all raised in this like culture of like there's an authority figure who always knows better than you. No matter what, there's always someone who knows better. And so we need to look to that person and seek that person for advice or follow the rules, follow the recipe, what have you. And so I like to remind people, my students often, that people have been making these herbal potions since before there was a standard system of measure, like long before. And that tends to be pretty comforting for people. Now, there are appropriate times to measure, let's be clear. If you are working with a low dose botanical, which would be a plant that can seriously harm you or even kill you if you take too high a dose. So if you're working with a low dose botanical, you definitely want to be precise in everything that you do from medicine making to dosing yourself. Or if there's any reason where you need to be cautious, like if you're really making tinctures that you want to be of a high medicinal quality that you can dose in a standard way for people, or if you are working with someone, or if you yourself have compromised health in some way, or you're on a pharmaceutical that you're worried about interacting with medicines, things like that, there are plenty of reasons to be precise with your tincture making and your dosaging. But for us, if you're someone who's making oxymels for enjoyment, or you're making something like a nourishing tea blend, or a sleepy time oxymel, or some fun potion, there's no need to be overly precise. There's no need to follow a recipe, and there's no need to get really caught up in proportions. Ultimately, if you're making something for yourself, you're always making it to taste, because if it doesn't taste good, you're not going to want to consume it, especially with teas. So it's helpful to learn basic proportions, and then, feel free to estimate. And the less we focus on measuring and the less we focus on specific recipes, the more we're using our intuition, and the more we're relying on our intuition and trusting our intuition. And in that way, making our potions becomes, a way of trusting ourselves, a way of connecting with ourselves, and a way of checking in with what we really want. So today we are straining and mixing a witch's vermouth. And we've got it here. So we've got our herbs. They have soaked in wine only overnight. And the herbs that we have in here are vervain, mugwort, clary sage, and yarrow, fresh yarrow. So it's the last of the fresh yarrow. I'll bring it a little closer so you can see it. Mugwort, the clary sage, and vervain. And this has been steeping in red wine just overnight. And in this case, I actually did follow a recipe. This recipe comes from a really fantastic book called The Witching Herbs, which is about using herbs in witchcraft. But I love the recipe because it's like handful of clary sage, handful of mugwort, handful of vervain, handful of yarrow, steep overnight, that sort of thing. So again, like this isn't the time where we need to get caught up in like, it's like 4 ounces of fresh yarrow, just like handfuls, etc. Again, this recipe I imagine is very old, coming from a time before when people had standard systems of measure. So these herbs have been steeping in our wine overnight. It smells really interesting. I'm guessing this is just an overnight steep. Usually we steep herbs for longer, but I'm guessing we just did this for overnight. I don't know. I know the clary sage tends to give up its essence pretty quickly. It smells strong. It smells like soup. And I'm going to strain it. I love using these stainless steel funnels with strainers. Oh, this needs to be pushed in. The strainer comes out, so it's super easy to clean. I definitely recommend for any of your herbal potions, you have one of these in your kitchen. So, and I was shaking this a lot. Like, I stirred it a lot after I made it, shook it a lot last night, shook it a lot this morning, then let it sit some more. Pull the herbies out. And usually I'll squeeze this with my hands, but for our purposes right now, I'm just going to press with this so that I can keep my hands clean. So I'm pressing the herbs out. A nice thing about working with fresh herbs is that because they already have a high water content, they don't tend to like absorb as much of the menstruum or the solvent that you're infusing into. So it's not as much high pressure to strain them out. All right, this is the mark, if you like. The mark is what's left over. So you can give that a look at those herbies in there. Put that aside. All right, now I kind of want to try this before we add anything else to it. Oh, the other thing we were supposed to do. Well, I'm going to give it a sample first. I'm going to try this at every stage. Yes, this is a tiny ladle. And yes, this is an adorable, tiny ball jar with a handle. Just want to give it a small taste. Woo! Oh my goodness. It's very bitter. You know, none of those herbs are extremely bitter. Like yarrow can be really bitter, but I'm guessing that's why it was just an overnight steep, because like, that's intense. So the next step is to add brandy, and we're doing this for a preservative because when you make any sort of herbal potion, you want there to be at least a 30% alcohol content so that it doesn't spoil. So the recipe that we're following said 1.5 cups of brandy. Again, this is mostly just as a preservative because, again, back in the day, people didn't have refrigeration. So you could refrigerate your potions if you want to. You don't have to. And it seems like the full 1.5 cups might not fit in this jar, so I might add the rest later. Put it in a bigger jar. And then we have a sprig of wormwood. Again, wormwood is an herb that you do want to be extremely careful with, not to mess around. But we have a sprig of wormwood for stirring. So the recipe said, we're not infusing wormwood into this because, again, wormwood is a low-dose botanical. It can be dangerous. But we want to get the oils of the wormwood in our potion. So we're just going to stir it. And this is a good time to, like, if you're a Reiki practitioner, if you work with any sort of symbols, any sacred numbers, you can do that. So just a little stir with the wormwood again. We want to be safe here. Let's just, bump off some of that wine. Now I'm going to taste it again because the recipe also said you could add some honey, which I might end up doing. A little bit. Ooh. Oh. That's really nice. It's like it's such a little bit of wormwood, but it really affects you. Oh my goodness. Wow. Okay. I really like that. Okay. I can see how this is something that like just opens your eyes. Like I could imagine drinking like a little like a thimbleful before doing some sort of circle or spiritual work. So that's really amazing. So I'm not going to add honey now because I really like it the way it is. Yeah. So that's our witch's brew. and I encourage you to make some herbal potions without measuring in the near future.